What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the PTCOFFEECAST, brought to you by The Movement. My name is Dalton, and alongside me today is my beautifully bearded friend, William. William, how are we doing today?
No complaints, man. It's been a good one. We already recorded one podcast. Trying to get another one done before I head out.
Head out. Where are you going?
I'm going away.
going on a little vacation.
Yeah, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm, for those who don't know, expecting my second boy in a couple days.
Anytime now. Probably as you listen to this episode, he's here.
I might have to leave halfway.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah, we better get into it, though. No, that's cool, man. That's exciting.
Oh, yeah. Super exciting. It's crazy.
I could imagine you're in this mode where it's like, you're excited about bringing another child into the world, but you're also just so already tired with like already having a child, and then like, you know, your wife's about to have another baby. It's just like, oh, you're like, I'm excited.
No, it really is genuine excitement.
No,
like,
yeah.
I think what it is like, I know there's going to be another adjustment.
Right.
Like, I'm already adjusted. It's kind of nice. Like, yeah, I'm tired, whatever, but I'm used to it.
Chaos is about to ensue.
Yeah. I know I'm going to need to re-figure out what my lifestyle is going to look like, and like how to do
life.
Yeah. With two kids.
Yeah. You know what would be helpful?
What's that?
If you had a framework.
You're right. Look at that, eh? I like it.
And you know who's all about frameworks?
Who?
We are. But before we talk about frameworks, if you guys aren't subscribed to the podcast, make sure you subscribe at PTCOFFEECAST on Spotify, as well as Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you're listening. That way you guys don't miss out on any of the episodes that we put out. If you want to see us on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. And then if you are interested in any of our free content, we have that link below in the show notes. We have our 3 Whys ebook. We have our sales PDF, and we also have Jenna's PDF where she talks about 10 things that require zero talent. And then we also have the link to our mentorship waitlist for cohort 2, which will be coming up in September, which we're super stoked about. Now, let's talk about frameworks. Yes, what kind of sparked this conversation for today's episode is a little bit of what's going on in our mentorship right now. We just implemented our module that talks about becoming a beast at the simple things, or creating like a simple framework to drive your practice, which simple obviously does not mean easy. But it can be much more effective if we can create a framework for ourselves as clinicians to deliver effective sessions, whether that be like an initial assessment or a follow-up session. And when we presented this module to the cohort, one of the common pieces of conversation that kept coming up was like, oh, I have done something like this before, but never really thought about it, like how I implement it, when I implement it, how frequently I implement it, that kind of stuff.
Or why,
which is like a bigger piece of it. And so that kind of got me and Will thinking like, oh, okay, we could talk about this. And so that's what led us to where we are today. And so we're going to talk about a couple of the things that we feel like are important about having frameworks for both yourself as a clinician and for your clients.
Yeah, and really like why having a framework can help you and your clients, right?
Yeah. So maybe what we could do is start with from a clinical standpoint. As a clinician, why having a framework would be helpful. And to give you guys a little bit of an example, in this module we talk about like the micro and the macro purposes of our initial assessment and our follow-ups, and then we provide the group with kind of a bit of a framework for how we try to accomplish that micro and macro purpose of the assessment. So for example, when we're talking about the follow-up sessions, we have things that we want to hit on, like us ourselves, Will and I, and our clinicians here and the people in the mentorship. We have things that we want to hit on at the start of the follow-up session, during the middle of the follow-up session, and the end of the follow-up session. And we provide kind of a 3-step framework for each part of that. So for example, the first part of the follow-up session, we always want to reconnect, reassess, and then set expectations for that session. So that is the framework that we use for the beginning of a follow-up session. So those are kind of the things that we're referring to when we're talking about providing like a framework.
Not to be confused with like model of care,
right?
Or McKenzie or
techniques or exercises or working with a particular population or using this assessment tool. Like that's not what we're talking about. The idea with this mentorship in general and then this specific topic is we're providing you with a framework that you can then take and implement for yourself, which is based off how you treat clinically.
Yeah, and this is really for the people that feel like they are scattered or anxious about their sessions, not really knowing if they're hitting all the points that they need to be in order to have a successful session.
Right, and that can be like one of the first points of like why we think it's important to have a framework from a clinician standpoint is it provides you with some sort of structure and reduces the anxiety of, okay, what am I actually getting out of this? And instead of just kind of like shooting in the dark, right? And so by having like those 3 kind of things in your mind that you're trying to check off, it gives you something to guide you through the session, right? Which then can anchor your session for you specifically, instead of like just walking into the session and knowing, okay, like I know it's important to reconnect with a client, but what am I doing to reconnect with the client? And have I thought about that at all? And I know that I need to reassess the client, but what am I going to do to reassess the client? And what is going to, in my mind, check that off that I've done it, right? And I think it just gives you some sort of consistency and anchor to how you're going to approach the session, which is going to reduce a lot of your anxiety around it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have the concern of like, did I get through enough? And I think that comes from not knowing what you're actually trying to get through. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so if you have a framework that holds you accountable to what you need to get through, it doesn't really matter if you get through 1 exercise or 3 or 5. What matters is how you go about doing that in your session.
Right.
Right? For example, did you tell them why this is relevant to where they are in the plan that you've set together and what you're going to expect from them when they go home? And do they feel confident about that? And do they have some awareness of what you might get into next session? Right? Those are all very important things. You could easily forget some of them. But if you have a framework, right, then you're making sure that you're hitting on those things. And it doesn't really matter if you only get through one thing because they've been told why, they have the expectations of like what this is for, where they are, what you're going to do next time.
Yeah. No, for sure. So I think like one thing in particular it does is it reduces that worry, that anxiety, gives you some like sort of stability in terms of like how your session's going to go. Is there anything else that you feel like you notice from a clinical standpoint that having that framework does?
From a clinical standpoint, I think it just forces it makes you, because you're looking at the purpose, right? You realize that you don't need to get through a ton. It's more about what are you getting from what you're doing.
Right.
So I think it removes some of the stress of the time constraint and worrying about delivering enough value. because it's keeping you accountable to the reason why you're having those sessions. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. And I don't think that we think enough about what we really want to get out of that follow-up session. Like we don't think about what the big purpose is. We're just kind of like going through the motions.
Yeah, we talked about it in the mentorship. We were talking about don't miss the forest through the trees. And a lot of times people get lost in the trees, like staring at the details, but miss the big picture. Like, what are you trying to get through? And so that can be where you think the value of a session is getting through every single test and someone knowing the exact diagnosis or something like that. But if you actually think big picture, it's like what they really need is to be on board and feel like this is the right plan to take them to where they need to be. And so in that second version, when you're looking at the whole big picture, the forest, then you realize, oh, that has nothing to do with how many tests I get through. It has more to do with highlighting their problem and helping them see that there's a solution for them that involves the plan that you're recommending. Right? So I think that's like, I kind of forget what the original point was, but
we got there.
Does what I said make sense though?
Yeah. No, it definitely does. And then I think, from a client standpoint, right? Like someone who is like working with you, having the consistency of what you do in a session and like doing that over a period of time, the client will start to adapt to that and know what to expect, which then helps make that relationship a lot smoother, right? So they will start to pick up on the fact that, oh, okay, I'm noticing a trend here. Like every time I come back in for a session, we reconnect, we reassess, and then we set expectations for what that session is going to be. And then we move into the next phase where we're like collecting information, we're ensuring, they're competent, and then we're implementing the next steps to go forward in the plan, right? Like they start to pick up on, okay, what things look like if that consistency is there, which then makes it a lot easier because they're like, without even really knowing it, coming prepared for that, which is then going to help them provide you with more valuable information as to what's going to successfully allow them to get to their goal, because they're going to start picking up on what you are looking for, and hopefully at that point then just like coming with that information and giving you thoughts based off of the perspective of what you're trying to get out of that session, which makes it way easier to communicate with the client. If you don't have that framework, and this is where it really like sparked my mind, is like people were like, oh yeah, like I would do this and I would do that, but there was no consistency of like when they would do it and how they would do it and why they're doing it. And so they're actually getting value out of doing it without even realizing it. But when you're able to have that framework and put it in a package that's then delivered consistently and intentionally, that elevates what you're getting out of those things for your client.
It can help avoid people falling off and stuff, because a lot of the reasons that people do fall off is because, things get maybe less consistent and less like maybe intentional as you go throughout the process, like day one, you're like all hype. You have this plan. You have, you communicate like how you're going to go through the process. But by the fifth session, there's no plan discussion at all. They have no clue how close they are to proximity of their goal. They think they're better. And so they stop coming.
Right. And if you don't have like a guiding framework for those things, then you're going to fall off that as well. Right. But if you have this laid out specifically, it's like, okay, we're following up again. Okay, we're checking these things off. Right. And then, we have other things implemented throughout like the client lifecycle, which if you're interested in learning more about that, you should join the mentorship. But we have things within the lifecycle that even enhances that connection piece again by setting aside reassessment, like a specific reassessment session that then re-anchors people's plans and then has them think about where they want to go. That enhances that kind of experience to avoid that kind of falling off of that guidance towards the end, right? But if you don't have anything for yourself as a clinician to do that, then it's just going to start to drift away, which then the client is also going to start to drift away.
So really hammering home those big points, like framework helps you with reducing your anxiety, having something to keep you accountable to get what you need out of your session. And from the client standpoint, it makes sure they're getting a consistent experience, and it reduces the risk of them falling off because they think they're better, or it's unclear about like where they are in the plan.
Yeah, and I think on the client standpoint, it subconsciously teaches them how to be evaluating themselves so that they can then come and provide you that information when you come together. Like if they know you're consistently, setting aside time to gather information from them, like through objective testing, then they're going to come with that information or be thinking about it in that way, which makes that easier, right? If they know you're going to ensure competency by going through a full 3 sets of 8 reps of box squats because that's just what you've always done, then they're going to come prepared to give you information around that thing. But if there's no consistency, then they don't really have anything to go off of, which then you're probably using more of your time trying to figure that out with the client instead of it just already being kind of part of what happens, which when you don't have a lot of time in your session, you want to make these things as efficient as possible.
Well said.
Yeah, I think that, and I think just before we wrap up, the last little piece to all of this is take the time to really think about the purpose of your initial assessment and your follow-up session and what you're trying to get out of it as a clinician and what you want your client to get out of or what you think your client wants to get out of those sessions, right? Like I think you really need to dive into that, and that will help you determine what you do within those sessions. We had the group break out and brainstorm those things in the mentorship, and it was really cool to see them come back and highlight some of the things that they're trying to, get out of it. And when we were sharing with them our why and our purpose for these sessions, it really helped to shift their mind in looking at it in a slightly different way. So yeah, I would encourage you to really think about that, write it down, evaluate it, see how it goes, when you're doing those sessions with your clients, like pay attention to that. Because I think there's more to it than you think. Like it's more than just getting information to give a diagnosis to then give them 5 exercises and send them on their way.
Boom.
Anything else?
No way.
All right, man.
I would never follow that.
Okay. Yeah, this is my cue to shut up and get out of the episode. Yeah, thanks so much for tuning in, guys. If you aren't following us on the podcast, make sure you subscribe. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you're listening, subscribe so you don't miss out on any episodes. If you aren't following us on Instagram, head over there, follow us at PTCOFFEECAST. If you want any of our free content, it's in the show notes below or our link in the bio on Instagram. You can get our 3Y ebook. You can get our sales PDF to help client outcomes. You can get Jenna's PDF where she talks about 10 things that require 0 talent. And then lastly, if you are interested in joining the mentorship, we are going to be launching a second cohort coming up in September. So make sure that you sign up for the wait list. That way when we release applications, you guys can fill out those applications and be ready to join the second cohort. But that is all we got for today, guys. As always, stay caffeinated. Peace.